Good morning and welcome to Moments with Melinda. I am your host, Melinda Moulton, and today I have with me Dr. Elise Guyette. Hi, Elise. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's so nice to see you, and thank you for being on my show.
Sure, my
Um, let
pleasure.
me, let me tell my viewers a little bit about you. Dr. Elise Guyette is a historian, author, educational consultant with strong research, writing, and leadership skills. She is an accomplished speaker, writer, and award-winning historian. Elise taught school for 14 years and was an adjunct professor at UVM, St. Michael's College, and Burlington College. Elise authored the book Discovering Black Vermont, African American Farmers in Heinsberg from 1790 to 1890. It was first published in 2010 and is now in its second edition as of 2021. She received the Hathaway Award from the Vermont Historical Society. The book is on the Center for Research on Vermont's list of high impact books about Vermont history. Wow. Oh, what a career.
You live long enough, you get to do a bunch of stuff.
Well, I don't know. You are very, very accomplished, Elise. And so I'm so glad you're going to spend time with me and my viewers today. But let's start at the beginning. And I'd love it if you would share a little bit about your childhood and growing up.
Well, I grew up in Rutland, Vermont, and it was a great place to grow up. I'm French Canadian, Lebanese, and Irish, and the town was a real immigrant town. It had the Italian section, the Irish section, the French section, the Polish section over in West Rutland. It was a real polyglot. And I was always wondering as a kid, why? Why were all those people here? So I was really excited when I reached fourth grade because, as everyone knows, fourth grade means you study state history. So I was so excited. I said, oh, yes, I'm going to learn about why all these people are here, and this is going to be really exciting. Of course, I didn't learn anything about any of those people. It was just,
And why was that? Why
the
was
Thomas Chittendens, the Ethan Allens, there was nothing about ethnicity in that book. The book even said that Native peoples never lived in Vermont. So I was very disappointed. And I think that was a real turning point in my mind about history, something about history, the way history is written, and as a 9 or 10-year-old, I didn't really know, I didn't form any plans, but I think that was maybe one of the things that really got me thinking about history and the way it's written and who's in it.
fascinating at that young age?
Yeah, yeah. And I asked my siblings if they had had any similar feelings, and they hadn't. So I don't know.
Did you continue to do research after that on your own to figure it out?
No, I didn't. Well, maybe it was research because as the years went on, I remember I kept looking in all of my books. Um, more carefully. I was looking for who was in it and whose pictures were in it. And by the time I got to eighth grade, I really had never run into a book that had a woman in a history book. And I really became really downhearted about my ethnicities and my gender. I thought, wow, maybe nobody like me ever did anything important. Um, so I sort of went into this sort of like this little tailspin, I think, for a while. Um, and then when I became a teacher, I was teaching in Swanton and I was given that same little green textbook to teach out of, the same one I had had in fourth grade. And I said to myself, no, that I can't believe that another book hasn't been written since then. So I said, I'm going to have to write it. So that's when I started doing research on all the waves of different ethnicities that came through the state. And I wrote a textbook, Vermont, a Cultural Patchwork, for schools, where it was the history of Vermont through the different groups that had come through the state.
Fascinating. How fascinating. Good for you. So, who would you say had the greatest influence on your trajectory toward history and education?
Well, I think the person actually was my sophomore English teacher, and I also had him again when I was a senior. I went to Catholic schools my whole life, and I didn't know what critical thinking was, but he taught the class about critical thinking. He taught me how to think. I remember resisting it, saying things like he was always talking about symbolism and what does this rose stand for? And I remember resisting it and saying, well, why can't a rose just be a rose sometimes? It always has to be a symbol of something. And so I resisted on that first time around. And then I realized it really had opened my mind up to all sorts of possibilities, and then I realized that in history, there's not a lot of right answers, which is what I didn't like about math, because there's always a right answer. And I had a hard time finding it in math. So I thought it was really exciting to finally be using my brain in a critical way and and for some reason history was the one that really stuck with me, that gee, I can research this and I can interpret this and to the best of my ability. And I can even argue with people about it because I liked arguing.
Oh,
So I think that a number of reasons that I
oh,
picked it.
that is classic. Now, you were a fourth to 12th year school teacher for 14 years and an adjunct professor at UVM St. Mike's and the now defunct Burlington College. Do you still do any teaching?
I no, I haven't done any teaching for a while. I guess I do teaching through talks. I give talks to people, but
Well, let's talk about that.
and I actually I get invited to talk to teachers sometimes about my research and how they might use it in the classroom.
So, talk to us a little bit about that because you have done a lot of presentations and workshops. Talk to us about some of the places that you've done these historic presentations and workshops.
Well, I've done a lot in Vermont, throughout Vermont, um, but I also have had the good fortune of living overseas, and I've also done some presentations in South Africa, in Kunming in China. Um, that was through translation. That was an interesting one that took twice as long as it normally does because it was translated. Um, but so I've done, the workshops are, how do you look at history? How do you look at who decides to write about whom and who gets written about? I think that's one of the things that I really want to imbue in people, especially who are teaching youngsters. Because you look at the stage of history, everybody was there. It was a huge stage, right? It wasn't just the most famous guys. They were surrounded by all sorts of other people who were supporting them. So what my mission has become is to put back on that stage all the people who've been written out of the stage because of the way history's been written. You don't
Yes.
take the big powerful guys out. They stay there, but you repopulate the stage with everybody else who was there at that time.
That's fascinating. Truly fascinating. Now, you were involved as a co-founder of the Burlington Edible History with Gail Rosenberg. Talk to us about this touring project, and is it still going on?
No, it's not going on anymore. It was COVID that ended it. But it was a fascinating project. It was Gail's idea in retirement, and she called me to ask me for a little advice, and I said, "Oh my gosh, Gail, we have to do this together because that's what I started as, researching immigrants, and that first book I wrote, I had lots of recipes in it, so it was kind of like we were on this trajectory to we had to do this together." So we interviewed a lot of people in town, people who immigrated here or the children of migrants, and we focused on their food history, their food traditions, their food businesses. And we walked around town for 3 hours telling these stories that have not been written down anywhere because they were family stories, these great stories, and eating 5 times at restaurants that where the food was connected to the point we were making historically. And it was fabulous. It was lasted for 5 years, and at the end of 5 years, we were still 5 stars on TripAdvisor. But then COVID came along and we stopped it. But
Now,
we did look at each other, and I'm sure your next question is going to be, so what did you do next?
well, no, I'm going to get into that in a second, though. But I just
Okay.
want to go back to the great honor for your book, Discovering Black Vermont African American Farmers in Heinsberg, 1790 to 1890. Talk to us about this book, and that is now in its second edition. We're going to move to that, and eventually I'm going to get to where we want to go. But I do
Okay.
want to talk to you about this extraordinary book that's now in its second edition. Talk to us about it.
Well, I had done a master's degree on looking at the census, trying to find out if there, in fact, were a number of blacks in Vermont in our history. Because when I was growing up, as I said, I grew up in Rutland, and I was always told that black people didn't come to Vermont. They just came through and they went to the underground, they went on the Underground Railroad, they went to Canada. Um, but this was another one of those thoughts I'm in my head. I tell people I was cursed with a logical mind. So I hear that story about how wonderful the Vermonters were and there wasn't any racism here. And I'm saying to myself as a kid, but if Vermont was such a great place, why didn't black people stay? Why'd they move through? So it was another one of these, it's just cursed with a logical mind, but sometimes it works out. Um, so when I started to get a master's in history, I had done so much research on so many other ethnic groups that I decided, well, I probably should do something on let's see if those stories that people said. So I was very lucky. A man called Tom Bassett, who was a former archivist at the University of Vermont, helped me by giving me a shoebox, one of those proverbial shoeboxes full of index cards. He said he had one winter gone through the census. He'd started in 1800 or 1810, I can't remember which. And he had an index card for every black person he found in the census, and it was in this box.
Wow.
And he had done it for his brother. His brother was a sociologist who wanted to do a study, but his brother died young. So this shoebox had just been sitting up in his fourth floor attic on Prospect Street for decades. And he loaned that to me. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with this, really. But the University of Vermont helped me make a database of it. So what I realized in that study was that there were black farmers throughout Vermont. 4% of the black population owned their own land and were black farmers. And two of those names were right near me in Heinsberg and Huntington, where you are sitting right now. So after I finished the master's, I thought, well, in my spare time, I'll go to the town clerk's office and see if I can find out anything about these two names that I had. I didn't know it was going to end up being a decades-long project, but it has.
Fascinating. And it's in print and people can get it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's Vermont Historical Society is publishing it, but
Okay.
bookstores have it.
Right. Phoenix Books. Or so to my viewers, if you're interested in reading Lisa's book, it's Discovering Black Vermont, African American Farmers in Heinsberg, 1790 to 1890. So check it out. It's an award-winning book and it's worthy of your time.
Hmm.
So you have been quoted as saying that everybody grows up with people telling them that Vermont outlawed slavery, but Vermont has never abolished slavery to this day, quote unquote. Talk to us about this, Elise.
Yeah. Well, we finally have now. When I wrote that, we hadn't yet, but we did uh, change the Constitution a couple of years ago, which finally took the slavery um, clause out of the Constitution. But when the Constitution was written, it was written as it just said that people ought not enslave people after their age of majority, which was 18 for women and 21 for men. So people were legally enslaved. I mean, through the 1840s, we find people being legally enslaved in Vermont. And then those who ignored the age limit, nobody did anything about it. There was nobody was coming around making sure that people were freed on their birthdays. And plenty of people who did know about the Constitution and maybe worried about it a little bit, when their people that they had enslaved were starting to reach their age of majority, they sold them out of state. They sold them like to New York. So, they were still enslaved for life. And then they bought somebody younger. And when I went through the census, there were a lot of children, 7 to 10 years old, who were living in white households. They were always called servants because that was the tradition in the North to call them servants instead of slaves. So it's hard to tell if people were enslaved or not. But when I look at these homes where there's these little kids with no other black person in the household, and it was perfectly legal to enslave them, I assume that most of them were enslaved.
Wow. So now, thank you for that, my friend. So now we're going to move on to your most recent project, the Burlington History and Culture Center. So talk to us about the inspiration behind starting BHCC. And to be transparent to my viewers, I do want you to know that I am also a co-founder, which Elise is, and Elise serves on the board, and I chair the advisory council. But talk about the inspiration behind this project.
Right. Well, the inspiration came from when Gail and I were taking tour groups around Burlington. We kept saying, gee, is this the only place to learn about the history of Burlington if you go on tours? Because there were a number of tours, a trolley tour, a Segway tour, you know. Is that the only way? There's no historical society in Burlington, which is just amazing for the largest city in the state. Um, there is a history museum. It's the Ethan Allen Homestead. So that's an important slice of Burlington history. But where would you go to find out anything else about Burlington history? And we were always pointing, saying, "Oh, look at that building. That would make a beautiful museum. But we'll buy that one." It was just sort of pie in the sky thinking as we're walking around. But then when our tours ended with COVID, we looked at each other and said, "Well, we're either going to write a book, because we had talked about that, writing a book about different ethnicities and their migration stories and their and recipes, that sort of thing, or we're going to start a museum." And so we decided on the museum piece. And immediately after Melinda retired, I asked her if she would like to be involved in it, and she said yes.
Yes, when I
Of course.
repurposed, I jumped
Yep.
right into it. I did not hesitate. So
Right.
so talk to us a little bit about where you are in the process of creating the Burlington History and Culture Center.
Mhm. So we got a wonderful grant from the Vermont Humanities, 10,000 a year for 3 years. So we've been using that money. Um, well, we created a website. We've been doing some research. We created a survey, which over 300 people have now completed, which is fantastic. We've been going on what we're calling a listening tour. We have lots of groups, discussion groups, focus groups, asking people what they'd like to see in such a museum. We've done a lot of interviews. So we've been collecting data. And at the end of this month, it'll be 18 months since we started. So then we'll need to start analyzing all that data.
Right.
So that's where we are now. We're going to be analyzing the data and creating a real strong vision and mission statement from all of that data because we want this to be community built. It's not up to us and the other two women who are doing this with us to decide, what Burlington wants and needs. So we're really a clearinghouse for other people's ideas. And we've already gotten lots of fascinating ideas on what themes and what stories people would like to see in the museum. And after we analyze all that data, then we'll move forward with doing more research, maybe creating more walking tours because we don't have a place yet. Or we're thinking about a prototype exhibit somewhere in town. So that's a possibility too. So we're trying to do before we get the space, we're trying to do things just to, get our message out there, get our faces out there that this is something that we're trying to do, and we're trying to become partners with a lot of different people in the city who are also interested in doing the same sort of thing. We
So
don't want to duplicate what anybody else is doing.
right, well, you're not.
Yeah,
It's so unique
right.
and special and really important. Now, I do understand that you are in the midst of a fundraising campaign to do a video project and hopefully hire an executive director. Talk to about us about this and let my viewers know where they can send a donation.
Well, they can go to our website. Sorry, you have to write the whole thing out. Burlington History and Culture Center.org. And then it will bring you, there's a donate button right at the top, and you can donate. And
And to my viewers, I just want you to know that there is no donation too small. But if we're gonna get this off the ground and make it happen, we really do need people to step up. And any donation you can make would be great. www.burlingtonhistoryandculturecenter.org and make a donation. We'd be very grateful if you would do that. Now, uh,
just let me mention that any donation $10 or higher we're going to have a wall of donors somewhere. And we're not going to have payment categories. It's just going to be an alphabetical list. These are the people who were the founding, funders of this place. So $10 or more, you get your name
Get your
someplace.
name, and it probably will be up on the website. There'll be somewhere on
Mhm.
the website where all the people will be listed. So
Yeah.
we'd love to have you get involved. Now, I know that you have stated that the Burlington History and Culture Center will help Burlington get back up on her feet and bring people together around the rich history of the Queen City. Talk to us about that.
Well, we're really hopeful that this could give people an opportunity to understand our history better, because if we understand our history, we understand where we are now, because we really are our history. History is not past. It's still here. It's in all of us. It's in our society. And for us to understand where we are now, any problems, any issues we have, we need to understand the roots of it, how we got here. And then we can understand how to fix anything that needs fixing. And you just look around today, there are a lot of things that need fixing. But that's where we're going to get it. We're going to get it by melding the past, which has created us, and what we have now. And then it can help us get into a better future. Uh, I've said to people before, I think if more people really deeply knew our history, we wouldn't be having the problems we're having in our country today. I think a lot of it stems from people not understanding history and how we got here.
And they don't teach civics anymore. Now, Elise, do you have a special story about someone who lived in Burlington that's a favorite of yours that you'd like to share with my viewers?
Oh gosh, I have a lot of.
Well, you know what my favorite one is.
Anne.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll tell Anne.
thank you.
So one of our first focus groups was with the Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and it was fascinating. They told us what people who are visually impaired need to enjoy a museum. But then at the same time, the director of VABB, John Thomas, told that he had done some research on a woman by the name of Anne Connolly. And she was born blind in the early 20th century, I believe, maybe late 19th, early 20th century. And this is at a time when blind people were put into institutions or hidden away in a room in a house and never went out anywhere. But she was born blind. Her family had enough money. They sent her to special schools. And she ended up in Vermont to teach schools to blind people. And she ended up eventually in Burlington. She started in St. Albans. She ends up in Burlington. She has a seeing eye dog called Betty. And apparently, no one had ever seen a seeing eye dog before, because mainly you didn't see people who were blind or visually impaired. They were all hidden away somewhere. So she has her dog Betty, and she's an amazing woman. She talked the mayor into giving her an office in City Hall, and then she talked to the press and announce that on such and such a day I'm going to be with Betty on such and such a time on the steps of City Hall. Come and meet Betty. So people would come and meet the dog, and then they would meet this very confident woman who happened to be blind, and it really surprised a lot of people that blind people could do what she was doing. A couple of her dogs got poisoned, so we can see that there was still a lot of discrimination against, people with any disabilities. She ended up being called the Blind Merchant of Burlington. I know she had a store on Cherry Street selling items that blind people made. And she's quite a figure, for people to emulate, that she could fight the disabilities that she did and
And so
do it
those
as well as
those
she
are
did.
going to be those are going to be the kind of stories that are going to be told at the Burlington History and Culture Center. So as we're coming down the wire here, Elise, I could talk to you for hours, as you well know. As a historian and someone who has lived a long and productive life studying humanity and their place in history, how do you believe our current history will be remembered?
Our current history is going to be one of those times in history, a lot of people think that progress is a straight line like this. We just keep getting better all the time, but that there's no such thing. I mean, our history is ups, where we win some victory for humanity, and downs where we lose that victory. That's what history is. It's ups and downs and ups and downs. All I can tell you is, to me, we're now in the down. We're way down, and that we need to dig ourselves out of this hole again to win back rights that we've already won in the past. Revolutions go backwards, and we can see our American Revolution going, it has gone backwards in the past, and it's gone up in the past. We've had wonderful victories for humanity, but now I'm afraid we're in a tailspin, and we have to stop that, and then we have to start climbing out again, to reach some victory for human beings.
Well, as somebody who started her career in fourth grade, wanting to know more about the real people in your society and in your world down there in Rutland, you must be pretty mortified with what's happening with the diverse, equitable, and inclusive movement in this country, that it's being erased, and that um, monuments and history is being erased and books are being banned. Um,
Hmm.
that must touch you in a very deep and profound way.
Hmm. Well, I've done a lot of research on Reconstruction, and Reconstruction was a time when Black people were in power in the South, for about 10 years, and then that ended, um, because there was a Reconstruction playbook that the ex-Confederates were using to make sure that that ended. And we're still using that playbook. It's
And
the
today's June 19th, so talk to my viewers about that.
Yeah, and today's, Juneteenth. It
Juneteenth.
was the day in 1865 when it wasn't until June that the final Confederacy units surrendered. A lot of people think the Civil War stopped with the surrender of Robert E. Lee. It did not. There were still plenty of forces fighting, and the last forces to surrender were in Texas. So it was when the United States Army got into Texas and announced that everyone had been emancipated. That happened on June 19th, 1865. So that day, there were great celebrations all over on that day. And there were many celebrations all during Reconstruction. The celebrations went downhill at the end, and they went downhill during the Jim Crow era. And then after that, they started going up again. So the state, do you know what state had the first statewide Juneteenth celebrations?
I don't know that.
1980s, Texas.
Texas.
Texas
Yeah.
started this all out. It was the place where they had the very first celebrations in 1865. It's where they made it a state holiday in the 1980s. Yeah, Texas. Imagine that.
Oh, on that. Well, listen, Elise, what advice do you have for our children and their children who are facing a world with a heating planet, income inequality, wars, the threat of fascism, and the rights of humanity being extinguished? I mean, what words of wisdom do you, as a historian and someone who's lived life, what do you have for our children?
Yeah, well, when we look at history, it's when people get out in the streets and protest. And we've been doing that in this country. We haven't reached the level that we need to reach in order to make a change. We do need to have more people out in the streets. But, when you don't seem to have any power in your own government, they're arresting and handcuffing, Democratic senators and mayors, and this is a
4-year-old little girls, sending 4-year-old little girls out of the country.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, we're,
What's
we're in
in
a
Vermont,
yeah,
the little girl, the high school graduate who came out of her graduation was picked up. I mean,
yeah, it's just horrible what's happening. We have due process is gone. That was a part of the 14th Amendment during Reconstruction. It's now gone in this country. It's an underpinning of our Constitution. It's an underpinning of our, justice and equality. And we don't have it anymore. So I think people really need to pay attention, not just, when it's not hurting them. A lot of people, it's not hurting me personally, so I'm not going to pay any attention. I think we need to pay attention all the time, and we can't rest on our laurels ever. We have to keep making sure that we don't go down into the doldrums again and, have something like this happen. This happened, I think, because a lot of people were not educated enough about our history and about what was going on in Washington. You know, we need to stay up on the news. I hear people say, I just can't, there's too much going on. I said, I know there's a lot going on, but we still need to understand what's going on. We don't have to do something about it every single day, but we need to understand and do something about it, when groups of people get together, because that's the only thing that's going to cause change.
Here,
It's the only
here.
thing it ever has.
Well, Elise, thank you so much for your time. This is about all the time that we do have. Um, and I want to thank you for your work. I'm so glad that I'm working with you on the Burlington History and Culture Center. I'm so delighted to have this time to work with you. And to my viewers, thank you for joining me and Elise for this half hour. And I look forward to seeing you all next time on Moments with Melinda. Have a great day.